Let's talk about kind of the anatomy of it, what those
Mhm.
muscles are, where they're located. A lot of people, they hear that term, they're not quite sure if is it the front, the back? I mean, you mentioned it, kind of being there's a top and a bottom, right? There's a
Mhm.
floor and a ceiling. So can you go through that?
Yeah, let's do that. So let's build the core because the pelvic floor is a part of that. So our six pack muscle, the rectus abdominis, lives directly under our skin, and that's why we chase that muscle as a indicator of fitness, right? But yet, from a functional perspective, those rectus abs sit you up on a bed, stand you up after you tie your shoe. There really is little function in
Mhm.
that muscle. If you go a little deeper in toward the body, there's two sets of muscles called our obliques, internal and external obliques. They make an X shape at the front of the body. They twist us. When we throw a football or do a shoulder check, those are the obliques. Deepest to that is a group of muscles called the transverse abdominis. Now, these muscles are super important and very undervalued. They are like a big, thick Olympic weight training belt or a corset. They start in the back of the body and wrap to the front. So that's what gives us shape. It holds us up. It protects our organs. It, gives us spine support. Now the cylinder is built. That diaphragm is that dome shaped muscle that
Mm.
creates the ceiling. The pelvic floor is the floor underneath it. And so if you're sitting right now and you're not on too cushiony of a chair, you should feel two little bony butt bones. Okay. So those little butt bones are called your ischial tuberosities. All right. And that's the pointy bones in the pelvis. The pelvic floor literally looks like a little hammock. There's layers of muscles and there's different angles of muscles, different attachment points. But you don't need to get into that technicality of the pelvic floor. But what people need to realize is when they are sitting on their butt and they feel those two bony butt bones, if you can feel those bones and then visualize where your pubic bone is, or touch that pubic bone at the front of your body and just get a sense of where the anus is. The pelvic floor really is the tissue that is located in between those four bony landmarks. All right. Functionally, the pelvic floor holds our organs up inside of us. There is a main nerve that runs from our brain down to that part of our body. It's called the pudendal nerve. Now, the pudendal nerve is super important. It has two really big jobs because it's a motor nerve and a sensory nerve. Now, what does that mean? It means that it's the information highway from your brain to your pelvic floor. So you go and lift up. If you're at the gym and maybe you're deadlifting, it's sending messages. If you're picking up your baby in a bucket seat, it's sending messages. If you're raking the lawn, it's sending messages about when it should work and when it should not work. And then it's also sensorial. So it creates the entire spectrum of feeling sensations from all the way from pain up to pleasure and everything in between. So this small little area of our body, and those of you, if you're watching the pelvic floor, if you were to join your index fingers and your thumb, that's kind of the shape of it. It's kind of like a spade, I guess, on a deck of cards.
Mhm.
All right.
Yeah.
And when we have poor posture, seated or standing, if you sling your purse or your backpack on one shoulder as a habit, if you've carried your kids on one hip, if you carry your cell phone, or like my dad used to wear his wallet in his back pocket all the time, the bones of our body are going to actually start to shift. The pelvis is going to be out of alignment. So a lot of people think that you have to have some sort of trauma, or you have to have had kids, or been a cyclist, or have these moments where, oh, now there's pelvic floor dysfunction. And actually that's a really big myth. It's not the case at all. It can happen just unbeknownst to you
Mm.
based on your activities of daily living and how you express those.
Yeah, it's really important to know. I know we have 4 young kids, and my wife, we had our first 2, so we started with twin boys who are now 7, and, my wife had a lot of urinary infrequency after that, right? Just the recovery process of that, and so, we really tried to work on that pelvic floor. One of the key exercises that we were doing was the Kegel, and,
Mhm.
obviously, it's probably the most commonly when most people think about the core and the abs, they're doing sit-ups, crunches, they're doing leg lifts. And then some people that know a little bit more, they're doing planks, right? It's kind of a little bit more advanced. Okay. And then a little bit more advanced is the Kegel. But what we're realizing is that that may not be in a lot of cases the best exercise for the pelvic floor.
I'm really glad you mentioned that because I 100% agree with everything you've said. The Kegel really has become the foundation of pelvic floor training. Yet in many cases, the Kegel can be almost the last thing that the body needs, especially if the pelvic floor is what we call hypertonic. Okay. So there's a spectrum. There can be too much tone, too much tension, too tight. We call that hypertonic. It's like if you give your kids, some sugar, they're going to be bouncing off the walls, hyper. On the other side, there's hypo. So there's a lack of tone. Now, in most cases, the way people, through my experience, my almost 20 years of working with people, when I ask them about the Kegel, they'll say, oh, yeah, it's when you imagine like you stop the flow of urine and then you start the flow of urine, right? And you can even do that just listening to this. Oh, yeah, I stop the flow of urine, everything tightens up, and then I start the flow of urine. If you are someone that is already living in that hypertonic state, that too tight state, a Kegel can actually elevate the level of tension. And a functional muscle, everyone, needs to have two parts to it. It's the yin and the yang, right? It's the day and the night. It's the peanut butter and the jelly. It's the work and the rest. So if you're already working all the time and you don't even realize it's happening, there's just so much tension. And now you're stopping the flow of urine and it's getting tighter and tighter, but you're not really in your mind, you're thinking, oh yeah, I'm releasing. But functionally, you're really not releasing. That's where the Kegel can actually not, and I don't want to say cause harm, but it's not going to fix the way the person is thinking, oh, I do my Kegels all the time, right? Why is this not changing in my body? So here's the little caveat to the Kegel. The Kegel is a great exercise when you reframe it. And here's what the reframe is. The reframe is instead of thinking of that group of muscles like a switch, I'm turning it on or I'm turning it off. It's either one or the other. There needs to be that in between. If you were at the gym with 10-pound dumbbells and you were doing a bicep curl, as you curled that weight toward your shoulder, the muscle is responding. It's the process, right? It's not just going boom, boom, right? So it's the same thing with the pelvic floor. When we inhale in through our nose, our lungs fill with air, the diaphragm contracts, and as the diaphragm lowers, the pelvic floor also lowers in response to that. So the pelvic floor is resting. When we exhale and the lungs empty and the diaphragm can go back to its expanded state, the pelvic floor follows it. So it's kind of like this dance. With the diaphragm and pelvic floor, they move together. And so if you think about picking up a grape with your vagina, it sounds crazy, but the lifting of an elevator, the lowering of an elevator, for guys, the metaphor or the symbolism or the visualization is the feeling you get when you walk into the lake for the first time, in the springtime, and the water gets about 3/4 the way up your thigh. And there's that lifting sensation of the scrotum of the boys, right? That's a pelvic floor lift. When you almost get into an accident and everything clenches, that's what we don't want. We don't want that really fast, dramatic tension, because right away, those muscles talk to the brain and it's like alert, 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 alert. And the body starts to really work in that sympathetic, cortisol goes up, and you're not in danger, but you're telling your brain that you are based on what you're doing with your pelvic floor. So the Kegel should be like a wave, waves on the ocean. You exhale and there's the lift. You inhale and there's the lower. It's very calm. It's very subtle, but that's where the power is, really, in the subtlety. And, Dr.
So
Jockers,
you're
I work
saying
with.
it's kind of like a dimmer switch almost. It's like you're kind of
Yes,
gradually
that's
increasing the contraction, gradually releasing it rather than just a quick, strong contraction release.
That's exactly what it is. And it's retraining your mind to feel the subtlety versus that great big sensation, which I think when it comes to movement and fitness, we're searching for the big burn. We're searching for the big stretch. And this is kind of the opposite of that. You're actually trying to it's like being a connoisseur of fine wine. You want to see how little movement can I create in that area of my body and my brain still recognize that that's happening? That's really what I try and, train my clients to think about.